There's a certain kind of energy that lives inside late 1970s New York, a mix of fear, electricity, graffiti, broken glass, and the kind of neon glow that never really goes out. And in 1979, a movie captured that roar of the city at night, loud, violent, surreal, and strangely beautiful. A movie that didn't just represent a time, it froze it. A movie that turned street gangs into mythology. And that film was The Warriors. This is the story of how one cult classic traveled from the streets of Coney Island all the way into controversy, panic, bans, and eventually cinematic immortality. A film that critics dismissed, communities feared, and audiences, decades later, continue to worship. A film that showed how one night can feel like an entire lifetime, and how survival, when the world is collapsing around you, becomes its own kind of poetry. The Warriors begins in a world that feels almost dreamlike, like an alternate New York where the gangs run the night. And to bring that world alive, director Walter Hill crafted a cast of young actors, many of them unknown, many of them untested. Michael Beck as Swan, the quiet leader forced into command. Deborah Van Valkenburg as Mercy, the girl caught between danger and desire. James Remar as the hot-headed Ajax. David Patrick Kelly as the unforgettable Luther. The man who whispers a line that would echo across movie history. Warriors, come out to play I. These weren't polished Hollywood stars. These were raw performers dropped into a raw world, their energy feeding the film's intensity. A cast built on attitude rather than fame. A cast whose performances felt half-acted, half-lived, like they really were running through the night, chased by forces bigger than themselves. And behind them was director Walter Hill, minimalist, sharp, obsessed with physicality and movement. Hill didn't want realism, he wanted a myth. A modern-day Greek legend dressed in leather vests and subway dust. The movie was inspired by Xenophon's Anabasis, the ancient story of warriors trapped behind enemy lines, trying to fight their way home. And suddenly the gangs of New York became something ancient, something tribal, something almost heroic. But beyond the myth, beyond the graffiti-painted fantasy, The Warriors is a simple, powerful story. A group falsely accused of murder, forced to cross the entire city, Bronx to Coney Island, while every gang in New York hunts them. Every train stop is another battlefield. Every corner is another trap. Every gang has its own style, its own rhythm, its own culture, like a comic book world made of shadows and streetlights. Walter Hill films New York as if it were endless, dangerous, and alive. The empty subway platforms, the flickering street lamps, the clatter of trains echoing like warning shots. Can they dig it? Cyrus asked in the opening scene. A moment that feels biblical, prophetic, explosive. And when the city responds with violence, the rest of the film becomes a night-long pulse of survival. But the way the film portrayed gangs, the way it made them stylish, mythical, even admirable, that's where the trouble began. When The Warriors was released in 1979, theaters weren't just showing the movie, they were becoming the movie. Across the US, several screenings saw fights break out. Some audiences arrived in real gang colors. A few incidents connected to showings were reported in news headlines. And suddenly, The Warriors wasn't just a movie, it was a threat. Paramount panicked. Some theaters refused to screen it, others demanded extra security. The media blamed the movie for inspiring violence, even though most incidents were more rumor than reality. But in Hollywood, controversy is oxygen, and The Warriors was breathing a lot of it. Some cities discouraged screenings. Some suburbs banned it from theaters outright. And within weeks, the studio pulled most of its advertisements, hoping things would calm down. But by then, the legend had already grown. The movie became one of those whispered titles, The film Too Dangerous for Normal Theaters, a film people wanted to see because they were told not to. And that's how a movie that critics mostly mocked ended up becoming one of the most successful cult films of all time. But what's fascinating is how the Warriors transformed over the decades. What once was accused of glamorizing gangs is now studied for its style, its commentary, its depiction of a city on the edge. Modern audiences don't see violence. They see a time capsule, a portrait of New York before it was polished, before it was cleaned up, before the neon faded. Today, the film is recognized for its bold visuals, its comic book framing, its synth-driven soundtrack, and its raw, street-level creativity. It's referenced in video games, music videos, hip-hop, fashion, and meme culture. It became a Rockstar Games video game. It inspired countless filmmakers. And for so many people, it became a symbol of survival, of pushing through a night where everything is against you, just trying to make it home. But what do we really learn from the Warriors? We learn that style can be more powerful than realism, that a story doesn't need to be big to feel epic, that danger, when framed as mythology, becomes unforgettable, and that sometimes a film that critics dismiss or fear ends up defining an entire generation. We learn that a movie can be made of simple tools, grit, style, music, color, and still end up echoing for decades. We learn that the city at night holds as much poetry as it does danger. And we learn that survival stories are timeless, whether told by ancient soldiers or by a gang trying to get from the Bronx to Coney Island. In the final moments, when the Warriors finally reach the beach, exhausted, bloody, but alive, the journey feels bigger than the story. It feels like a reflection of every long night we've lived through. Every moment where we didn't know if we'd make it to the morning. Every fight we've won just by refusing to give up. The Warriors didn't ask to become a cult classic. It didn't aim to become controversial. It didn't try to change cinema. But sometimes the movies that hit the hardest are the ones that never meant to. And as the sun rises over Coney Island and the credits roll, one thing becomes clear. Some stories survive not because they're safe, but because they're unforgettable.